In this training, we're going to be looking at creating single line diagrams in Revit that span multiple sheets using ElectroBIM. So most of our training that we do is on a single drafting view in Revit. And when you take the drafting view to a sheet, each sheet shows a whole drafting view. You can't split the drafting view across multiple sheets. So the way that you handle multiple sheets with ElectroBIM is that you have multiple drafting views for your single line diagram. So here I have everything on a single drafting view. This is the entire single line diagram for our project. And this is all going to end up on one sheet. If we want to split this across multiple sheets, the way we do that is that we split it across multiple drafting views. Unfortunately, there's no good way to take a drafting view and split it up into multiple different drafting views. So if you start on your project and you do a bunch of work and you have a single line diagram that you realize you have to split across multiple drafting views, there's really not a good way to split it and have that work with ElectroBIM. What you're going to have to do is you're going to have to erase part of it and redraw it on the other view. In this case, I'm just going to erase this whole thing and we're going to redraw it across a couple of different drafting views. So we will go to view and we'll go to drafting view and we will create single line diagram number 1. And now I can run our generate command and we'll generate a 1 line. And I'm going to take MDP1. And so we'll do everything on MDP1 on this drafting view. Then we will create another drafting view. We'll call this single line diagram 2. And we'll run generate again and we'll generate a riser this time. You can see that the stuff that's been inserted is in blue here. So this can help you keep track of what you have inserted across your different drafting views. We're going to take MDP2, insert it on this drafting view. If you were paying attention when we ran the generate riser, you notice that MDP3 is also inserted, but we haven't actually inserted that in this training. If I run panel edit, we can pull that panel up and run highlight panel. And then select highlight on drafting 1. This will show us the single line diagram. So it's actually over on this drafting view, which doesn't have a great name. We're going to use it later. I'm going to rename this one to single line diagram 3 so we can keep track of it for the future. That gives us our 3 sections for this project. There's actually a couple pieces that are not inserted. If we run insert link, we can go back to our single line diagram. This will be our first single line. And so we got a couple pieces that were not inserted in those generates. And there's various ways you can handle this. You could run a generate and then erase a bunch of stuff. In this case, since there's only a couple, I'm going to run insert link to put a couple of these in. We'll put in the transformer. We'll do that as a utility transformer graphic. Put that in here, and then we'll run insert link again. Select our switchboard. Choose a graphic. Put it on the drafting view. And then from here, I am going to run the generate. I'll do generate 1 line and we'll take that CTP. So this will put the CTP and the piece of equipment connected to it on the drafting view in one step. Now we have our single line spread across multiple drafting views, and then each of these drafting views can go on a separate sheet. So if we go into a sheet, we can make a new sheet. And then you put the drafting view that you want on that sheet. In this case, they actually all would fit on one, so they're not going to totally fill the sheet. But if this was bigger, it would fill that sheet, and then you just have multiple sheets with multiple drafting views. Now, looking at these drafting views, we have the ending of our single line diagram. We don't have the connection back to that other sheet, so there's a little bit missing here for the connection to that other sheet. If you look at the kind of the base of our single line diagram, the starting point, again, it doesn't indicate anywhere that it's connecting to those other sheets. Here, you're going to need to do some additional work to document that. The generate command's not putting that in. So I want to walk through a couple different ways you can make that happen. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this switchboard and make it bigger, so we have a little bit of room to play with here. On this sheet, what I would do to indicate our connection to the other sheets is I would run our circuit insert command. You can select the switchboard, and then we can insert the feeders to all of these other panels as a individual item. So I'll run MDP1. I'll take that circuit. I can draft in the circuit here. And so now we have that circuit being indicated, and I'll do that for the other two circuits as well. That includes those circuits. It's got the breaker. It's got the sizes. Now, when we update anything in the project, this is all linked and it'll update automatically. We do have these lines hanging out here that don't really go anywhere. Again, that's going to be handled with some drafting, just to demonstrate that I've created a little continuation symbol. So we're going to insert that as a detail component. So I can put this symbol here on the end of this line. It's kind of indicating, hey, this is, not the end of that line. It's actually going somewhere else. And then you would put some text in. Just putting in some labels here. They don't actually match to the sheet names, but that gives you the idea of how you would do that. Then on the other sheets, you again also need to have the same sort of continuation line coming into this MDP. I'm going to show you a couple ways to handle that, just so that you have some ways that you can do this depending on what you want to do. First thing I'm going to do is on this sheet, I'm going to run insert link. I'm going to select that switchboard, and I'm going to insert the switchboard on this sheet. What that does is it puts the switchboard in and it puts the feeder in. That gets us the feeder between these two. There's otherwise no way to actually insert that feeder. We have the switchboard inserted. I'm going to erase that, and then I'm going to run the calculate just to show you what happens with the graphics, and then we're going to need to clean that up. All right, after we run the calculate, you can see that it puts that circuit breaker onto this feeder for us. And you probably don't want that to actually show up on this drafting view. So we can get rid of it by running the graphic remove command, and we can select that breaker, and it'll get rid of it. However, when you do that, it also removes it from this view as well. The feeder is seen as the same feeder on both drafting views, and it's going to do the same thing with that breaker graphic on both. The same thing applies to this feeder ID. If you don't want to show that on one or the other, if you remove it from one, it's going to remove it from both. So if I remove it here, it also removes it from this one. So the simplest way to handle this is to actually remove it so that you don't have the graphics, and then manually add it as a second step. I'm going to add the graphic back. I'm going to select this. I'm going to add the breaker. And now that's a graphic more like a meter rather than being notated as the overcurrent protection for the feeder. So you know that that's the breaker, but ElectroBIM doesn't have it as the breaker, so it's not going to show up on this instance of the feeder. Same with the feeder ID. If we want to show the feeder ID just here, we could select that, add that feeder ID. And it's going to prompt us because it knows that this is a feeder ID. Do we want to use it as the feeder ID? And if we do that, it's going to put it back on that other drafting view, and you might not want to do that. Or you can just insert it as a regular graphic, and then it's not really being tagged as the feeder ID. So now it's showing up here, but not here. And again, what you do is a question of how you want this drafted. You definitely only want the breaker here and not on this one. Whether you have the feeder ID on the two drafting views is a question of how you want that labeled. If you were doing this by hand, you'd only have it on one because you don't want to have to maintain it in both locations. With ElectroBIM, updating it, it's really not that big a deal to have it dimensioned twice because the software keeps that dimension up to date on both drafting views. All right, so that's one way we can have handle this continuation. There's another way you could handle that. Again, we're going to insert link to get the feeder in there. I'm going to put our switchboard on. And rather than changing our graphic, we could use some masking to get rid of that. So if I go to annotate and I put in a masking region, and now it's not showing that graphic. So that way we won't have to mess with the graphics at all. We just hide it. And then a little bit of cleanup, get rid of these labels. And now this is actually a visible item. So if we go take a look at it on our drafting, actually on our sheet, it shows up there. You don't really want to have that box. So to get rid of that, if you select and we edit the boundary, and then you've got all of these lines, and we change the line style to an invisible line. Now it doesn't show up. You can still select it, so you have to know it's there. So there's a little bit of hidden stuff that's going on. You just have to be aware of that. But then you go look at the sheet, and it's not visible there. bounds are going to include it. So just be aware of that. There's just a little bit of extra space being used. Again, it's not things there, so it'll all work out, but just that's why it's a little bit wider over there on the left. It's bigger than it needs to be because it's including space for that thing that's hidden. The final option would be to run our circuit insert command. If you press escape, it'll just let you draft something in. In this case, we're going to do no breaker. We'll do no ID. And we can just put in a line here and then add our continuation symbol. You can also just do that with a detail line. You don't even need to do it with our circuit insert command. Those are the 3 different ways you can show the link between the drafting views. The nice thing about using the first 2 options here are that if you update anything, this is all going to update. So you definitely want to use the circuit insert on the main drafting view like we did here, because these will update. If you do it like we did for the first or the second, these are going to update. This one's not linked to anything, so it won't update. So if we run an edit command and make a change, and we'll take MDP1, and we change this to just say a 600 amp panel, that's going to give us a 600 amp breaker, 600 amp feeder. That updates the breaker size here, so it saw that change. Over here, it's going to update that feeder size as well, and obviously also the panel size.